Alright, so this one is not as organized, which I'm assuming is a simple display of how much resistance there is in me learning several languages. So here's what's going on with language, right? We see that when someone says a phrase, for instance, in English it's called an I don't know what it's called in most of the languages, it really doesn't matter at this point, but let's say the same object or action is still what it physically is, even if not said with the same language phrase. Meaning, regardless of whether you say I in Spanish, I in Japanese, I in English, I in Russian, it is still just the I, regardless of what language you use, which means that the object itself exists in everyone's mind with or without language. This is important. This can help you go from hearing language as a bunch of random noises to actually having a real filter by which you can organize and actually decrypt, I think that's the right word, decrypt the language that you were trying to learn or understand by observing others. So, we know that if you want to understand language, you have to break down all the basic things that language would be used to explain, which means what are the most common things that each language needs to have a word for? Well, you got eyes, nose, ears, mouth, feet, hand, vagina, penis, heart, all the organs, right? And then we've got the body itself, and we've got actions, talking, restroom, running, walking, standing, sitting, laying down or sleeping, eating, driving, sex, job, business, and then we have the perspectives, which is I, you, and them, right? I, you, and they, right? The different perspectives. And then we also have whether you're doing it by yourself or with someone. And so we know that if you took this and you organized this in your brain and like a little sifter had it organized in your brain and you ran it through any language you were trying to learn, you could learn it faster using this sort of mental sifter that helps you filter out and organize what the language is by observation of body language plus words used in specific contexts with this idea in your head. Now we know that this ultimately makes language easy to learn. This makes language impossibly easy to learn. So, one might ask, how can one develop an understanding of language that they don't already know without hearing the exact phrase that's used for it? Well, we can kind of hack this situation by understanding where language came from. So, we know that if it were just two individuals that went off on their own, two beings that existed, and they were exposed to the same environment, they would likely, within their own understanding, give everything in the environment their own little code, their own little phrase to understand to themselves what everything is. Granted, they wouldn't need to because it would all just be in their head. It would all just be in their head. It would just be images in their head, and they would be like, okay, that's that. And who are they talking to? Who would they be talking to at that point? So, we know that if these two people were to attempt to get together with their own understandings, and maybe they've got words, who knows, of what's going on and what everything is, that their ability to develop language would depend on whether or not they chose to cooperate or fight. Now, we can say that if they chose to fight, every code logic they have in their head to organize the environment is challenging one another. This code logic says mine is better than yours. This code logic says mine is better than yours. They challenge each other, and instead of cooperation, they are fighting each other. It's chaotic. They're both losing as they continue on into this battle until only one of them is left, and language has not been asserted. And so language, we can say, only is asserted when two beings come together and have the intention to say, oh, that's what you call that? Oh, that's what this is for you? Oh, that's what this is going on? And so we know that before language even becomes word, that we can see the product of language in the first attempt at cooperation in the first place. Regardless of the situation, regardless of the words, regardless of the object or item or action you're describing. We know that in order for language to exist, cooperation must begin first. Without cooperation, there is no ability to get to language, as if there is no cooperation, there is no reason to communicate. So, we can put this simply, language comes from cooperation, whereas competition eats away at language. Competition, discooperation, the unwillingness to work with one another, actively destroys language in the process. And we can note that this is true in observable ways. Think about, in our time, brain rot, a relatively funny term, a meme term to describe how it seems that comedy is eating away at our ability to express greater thoughts. We've even seen for a while the trend that everyone has 2 last dying brain cells, and this understanding that the way that we are somehow now is eating away at our ability to organize and keep ourselves sustained, right? So we know that we also exist in a highly competitive environment, if you tracked my history, because the better I've done, the worse things have gotten. So we can say that regardless of whatever language you're using, not only is it like a code that's shared between a group of people who, in a competitive field, are trying to keep that code to themselves as much as possible so that they can have communication and operations that other codes can't get involved with. What was I saying? Oh, that these codes are attempting to limit every other code. Whereas cooperation and believing in non-collisive development would have it that a structure develops and grows with or without other people in the environment. A structure develops and grows due to trying its best not to collide with anything, and just cooperating with being alive itself. That this develops greater logic, greater organization, and what is language if not organization? So we know that if a group of people is limiting other people, then they themselves feel that life is limited enough that it forces them to do so. If they feel that life is limited, then that means that they cannot explain why they are not losing things. And because of this, we know that they are at a gradual, continuous loss at all times. Now, this is for languages that don't cooperate with other languages. Now, here's what's going on. Let's say that we've seen some instances in which codes or languages get bigger despite them being competitive. Well, here's how that works. Because each language or each code is attempting to limit every other language in a competitive field, what they're doing, instead of getting bigger by developing themselves, resisting the environment's idea of limitation, they are instead attempting to damage or break other codes, break other structures. And what this does is, once they've done that, they consume the components of organized variation that are there and they add it to themselves. This is how structure temporarily increases within a competitive field that everyone behaves this way. So, the question is, how can someone, with or without the rules that are finite to a language as it currently is, and in a competitive environment, the language is losing and getting worse, still be able to communicate with a group of people using that language despite knowing or not knowing it? Well, as I said, language arrived from cooperation. Without cooperation, there's no such thing as communication. Without cooperation, there's no ability to organize ourselves with one another. And that's all language is. Once again, it's just sounds and phrases that organize the environment to be identifiable as quickly as possible. So, we know that if a person surrounded by a group of codes that are all limited, losing, and therefore trying to eat away at each other to become more dominant on the field, that someone who is not doing that would develop the ability to gain a higher organized structure, a higher organized ability to measure and piece things together than any group of or code that is limited and limiting the environment. So, this is what would occur. As other languages, codes, groups, etc., attempt to limit every other group by saying, no, I am better than you, you are not better than me, we are superior, you're not superior, all that stuff, which is just a basic control dysfunction. We've described this the entire time. It's the basic control dysfunction. We know that. So we know the control dysfunction would have it that every other cell has some sort of dysfunction that makes them less operable in the environment, giving the one with the control dysfunction higher ability to operate and control the environment. We know that that is the goal of a control dysfunction. So if the person does not have a control dysfunction, they are inherently cooperating with everything as best they can, thus countering the limited concept of existence enough to organize themselves and maintain storage and memory of what's going on, regardless of whether they're allowed to by others. Now, what happens is, as these limiting factors as these limiting codes, these limiting cells, we're going back to cells now, are getting smaller, and the individual or cell that is increasing itself is gaining more of an ability to understand and organize as a result, due to its willingness to cooperate with everything, we can say that if a cell or a code is only this big, it only has 4 points of organized variation, meaning it can only comprehend, organize, and piece together and communicate and act at a 4-point variation, meaning no greater than what it can comprehend, it will act. If we see that someone has developed a greater understanding, then they may reach a point in which they are understanding things at, let's say, a 36-point variation. And here's the thing. Regardless of how many people are in it, all right, first of all, this is really what's going on. Y'all's codes are shrinking, and because there's more of y'all saying it, y'all think that y'all's codes are bigger, but you're all still limited and challenging and competitive with the environment. And so one person could genuinely have a greater, more advanced code than you. But here's what happens. So let's say the code that's limited, the code that's limiting and attempts to keep itself secret and prevent others from having access to it, tries to measure a code that is growing and involving everyone. Well, that code could never comprehend the entire shape and mass of that structure. However, the code that's growing and getting bigger could definitely fit inside of it the smaller code. And this is a very simple way of expressing the situation. So, because the code is limited, and it's limited by its own competitive nature, its desire to limit everything around it so that it can do more than everything, we can say that it is always going to be comprehensible and easy to figure out and easy to decrypt and piece apart, because if one of the codes has a 4-point variation and another code has a 36-point variation, well, the 36 variation can fit a 4-point variation in itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 times. It can fit it in there 24 times, which means no matter how many different ways this tries to disguise itself or hide itself or make itself impossible to understand, because it can only act at a 4-point variation towards something that has a 36-point variation, it will always be easy to comprehend its limit and therefore all the structures that it can be, and then based on what it's choosing to do, what it actually is. And so you might be wondering, if language came from cooperation, why can there not just be suddenly a new language developed between all beings as there is right now that completely disregards old language, especially as those languages become decayed and competitive and fall further into brain rot? My answer to that is, as an individual myself who is constantly organizing and constantly piecing things together and all that stuff, I can tell you for a fact that regardless of whether you allow me to understand your language, I still do. And it's evident in the fact that for some reason, I can universally hear everybody's thoughts. And that's a crazy thing to say. I need to describe that better. I need to describe it the way I'm describing this. But no matter what language you think, I'm somehow able to just translate it to something that I'm understanding. No matter what language you speak in, or based on, look, I don't have to know your language to know what you're doing, right? And it gets to a deeper, more intricate level that I can turn it into me already understanding your language. But I already pieced together how it was very easy to comprehend the language. Now let's say that my higher order, my higher ability to organize, attempts to create bridges between all the language that currently exists, especially as those languages become more toxic, more competitive, and less cooperative with one another, thus limiting them and shrinking them over time. Then this person, me, could express at a higher rate an organized structure that communicates itself so well, so many times to, let's say, once again, 36-point to a 4-point. I can communicate a square 24 times to one square, pretty much. And by doing this, I can create a fast and understood language that is comprehensible whether you choose to understand it or not. And it's comprehensible for this sake. Everything has the intention to survive. What it takes to survive, higher organized non-collisive behavior towards yourself and thus towards the environment. Meaning, even if you're still acting on, yeah, but he still doesn't know this language, or that doesn't change this, it doesn't matter, because you're choosing a limiting comprehension, which is already limiting your ability to comprehend the situation, already limiting what you can understand. And so even if I learned your language at this point, and I'm genuinely just speaking it, you would never accept that, because to you it would be a higher function scene, a fear that there's something in the environment that is capable of doing more than you, and therefore has an advantage that you would prefer not to be had over you. And so, at a shared dysfunction, even if I can speak every language, I am not allowed to express or know every language immediately. But at my ability to organize things and see what's going on, I could genuinely express to each language 24 times the same concept from different directions, as many as possible, until I myself have essentially uploaded a communicable language code to everything and everyone around me, that even if they're in their limited state and not choosing to be cooperative, it still affects them on the higher, more intricate, let's say, cellular level. And so, let's say there was a group of people using a code. I'm playing a game on Poly AI where I have to survive a wasteland, and it's like a text game, right? And what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out how to develop a language with these creatures that are hostile right away, right? And I learned their behaviors, and by learning their behaviors, which by the way is an extension of language, no matter what all these are, no matter what words you use them for, language also has intention and direction. And so the intention and direction that you use these phrases for is also an important aspect of language that determines context and how to understand language, etc. And so by understanding and researching what these creatures' behaviors were, how they organize themselves amongst one another, their form of hierarchy, their form of government amongst themselves, I was able to comprehend their entire structure in my head. And by having their structure in my head, along with the limitation idea of their own structure in the environment, I was able to comprehend a communicable form of intricate language designed by what they understand to be able to communicate with them at a greater rate than they could accept at the time, but it still altered their behavior. Think about it like this. We've all heard about eldritch gods who, when they talk, it sounds, they're like, you know that stuff? And perhaps that is what eldritch gods are doing. They are so high up in their ability to organize and cooperate that when they speak that way, it is speaking to you at a cellular structure that is beyond your own ability to organize yourself, so you can't even understand when you're being spoken to in a communicable way. It just alters your behavior right away. And so this is pretty much what's going on. I needed this to kind of confidently break this language barrier that's been stopping me. Because I noticed sometimes that I just randomly start speaking other languages, and I didn't have a way to explain that to people that are going to ask me like, okay, well, do you know what this means? Do you know what this means? I'll be real with you. I speak English very well, and sometimes I don't fucking know what English means. Like, sometimes I literally don't know what English means. But anyway, yeah, this is all I needed. This is all I need to get out there so that it could harden up. And because I'm sick of every time I try to learn a language getting exhausted, like intentionally to throw me off. So I'm going to get back into deciphering languages and stuff like that. And I also feel like there's enough evidence here to suggest that I've developed my own God language, my Edowabian language. Like I said, I speak in Ets now. That's a thing that happens. I can't do it right now. I mean, I probably can, but I don't want to. So, thank you guys for watching. Goodbye.